Information-fueled.
Opinion-driven.
This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
8:06, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 89.7 WTN. Welcome on in to Nashville's Morning News. Dan Mandis here, and Donald Trump yesterday announcing that those tariffs will begin, of course, on Canada and Mexico and China. Those do begin today.
But very importantly, tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start. So they're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs. I would just say this to people in Canada or Mexico: if they're going to build car plants, the people that are doing them are much better off building here, because we have the market. We're the market where they sell the most.
EJ Antoni is joining us. He is, of course, the economist for the Heritage Foundation. You've seen him on Fox News as well. EJ, always great to have you on. So there's a lot of course, hand-wringing. The markets reacted yesterday. A lot of folks saying, well, this is going to cause prices to go up. Some people are saying it's only going to be a temporary rise. It's only going to be on some products. Give me your first flash take on these tariffs.
Well, I think people need to remember that there are no hard and fast rules when it comes to tariffs. In other words, don't listen to the people who say tariffs are always and everywhere bad, but also don't listen to the people who say tariffs are always and everywhere good. Look, there's a right way and a wrong way to implement these things. There's a right time and a wrong time. You know, most infamous probably was Herbert Hoover. The tariffs that he implemented essentially helped worsen the Great Depression in the early 1930s. Conversely, when McKinley did it, he did it expertly well, and it helped, I think, make America's golden age even more golden, even better than it already was at that time. So again, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. Fortunately, it seems like what Trump is doing is a much more scientific approach than Hoover, and much more closely resembles what McKinley did. So I think the effects will be much better.
So he said a number of different things, as I've been mentioning. 25% tariffs on China. No, 20% is China, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong. You've got 25% on Mexico and Canada. And these also got reciprocal tariffs on any country that has tariffs against us. It's going to be reciprocal against them. So it does seem like there is a lot that he has sort of thought out here. Also, of course, by the way, we have seen these tariffs have an impact in the sense that we are now seeing Apple was one. This chips manufacturer is another one from Taiwan that was announced yesterday. There are companies that are moving here and opening up plants and manufacturing here to avoid these tariffs. So it does seem like they are having a positive impact.
Well, absolutely. And let's not forget, this is part of the carrot and stick approach that Trump is using to return manufacturing to the United States, so that things will be made in America, and we will be employing more Americans. So obviously, tariffs are the stick. What's the carrot? Well, he intends to reduce the tax and regulatory burden on American businesses, on American manufacturers specifically. He intends to reduce that burden so low that it provides a tremendous incentive to re-onshore manufacturing, to reverse that corporate inversion where people want to send their factories and send the American jobs overseas. The other thing to remember is that things like these 25% tariff rates on Canada, for example, that's not being pulled out of thin air. If you look at both the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, so that would include things like quotas, both the tariff and non-tariff barriers that Canada puts on American exports to Canada, whether it's dairy products or automotive parts, whatever the case may be, the average there is about 25%. And so don't forget that Trump loves to do more than one thing at once. He is simultaneously putting on a tariff that is approximating reciprocity, and he's also putting on a tariff to say to Canada, look, you need to do more to help us with the trade deficit. You need to do more to help us with the fentanyl crisis, et cetera. Trump is taking a very multifaceted approach, even if he's using only one single tool to achieve multiple ends.
Talk a little bit about the trade imbalance that we have with Canada and with Mexico. Why is there such an imbalance? Is it just that Canada simply doesn't need as much from us as we need from them, or how does that whole thing work?
Well, it works a couple of different ways, not the least of which is the fact that, again, Canada penalizes American exports in a whole host of different ways, which we don't do to them. The other thing is that Canada has been allowing China to essentially abuse the USMCA, the United States Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And what they're doing is essentially allowing these Chinese companies to set up shop in Canada, pretend they are Canadian firms, and thereby get in on the trade deal in the USMCA, when in fact it is really all Chinese products, right? These are Chinese manufactured goods. Half the time, they're not even actually being made in Canada. It's literally just being imported to Canada from China and then repackaged and resold here in the U.S. So it's a flagrant abuse of the trade agreement that we have with Canada. Canada has been made aware of it, and they have done absolutely nothing to police it because China is allowing them to skim a little off the top. So China's making out like a bandit. They're getting around the different trade penalties we've put in place on them. And Canada is doing just fine on it because they're getting paid on the deal.
EJ Antoni, economist for the Heritage Foundation. Also, you've seen him on Fox News. EJ, the other thing that I think is interesting about all of this is you were talking about the carrot and the stick and having companies move here. Talk about, and again, just the two big that have come out in the last couple of weeks. You did have Apple, a $500 billion investment. We also have this chip manufacturer. I don't remember right offhand how much that was as far as an investment goes. $100 billion, maybe that's what it was. But talk about the economic impact of those corporations coming to America and the impact of those jobs and those jobs and that investment in America.
Well, I think anyone who has driven through much of what used to be the industrial belt, what we now call the Rust Belt, sees the impact of corporations moving overseas, has seen the impact of factories moving overseas, has seen the impact of American jobs being sent overseas. And so this is going to have exactly the opposite effect. Instead of those businesses closing up shop in, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, you name it, all these different areas, instead of closing up shop there and opening factories in Mexico or other places around the world, we're going to see exactly the opposite. We're going to see those factories move back to America because of this investment. Investment is basically just another way of saying, look, these firms are going to take money and they're going to use it to build plants, to build equipment here in the United States so that they can employ Americans. This is a good thing for the American economy in the long term.
And that actually, that expands our tax base too, right? Because you've got now people that are going to be working. Maybe there's folks that haven't worked in a long time, the Rust Belt, right? And so that means that more people are working, and that means more, a bigger tax base for our government to draw taxes from.
Absolutely. It's funny you mention this. This is actually one of the things that J.D. Vance touches on, at least briefly, in his book Hillbilly Elegy, where you have essentially not only a hollowing out of America's industrial base, but at the same time you lose the revenue from the corporations, and you also lose the personal income tax revenue from people who are no longer employed, and it is replaced by people living on the dole. So instead of me working and earning money and paying a portion of that money to the government in tax receipts, I now have the government as my source of income, and so I went from being a payer into the system to essentially only a taker. And now you have exacerbated not only America's trade deficit, but America's federal deficit as well, both of which we need to get down today. And so, again, re-onshoring manufacturing and bringing jobs back to America is going to help reverse all of that, reducing both the trade deficit and the federal deficit at the same time.
EJ, got a couple more questions for you. Got to check the roads, though, very quickly here on WTN. Economist for the Heritage Foundation, EJ Antoni, also Fox News. So, EJ, I think that what Donald Trump is trying to do, you'd mentioned earlier that the president likes to do multiple things at once. And I think that, and I sort of described it earlier, it feels like he's got this cauldron of economic policy that he's trying to do, right? So he's trying to implement tariffs. That means that if a company decides that they're going to stay in whatever country they're in, then we'll get will end up getting some revenue from those tariffs. He wants to bring jobs here. That, of course, expands the tax base. And if you open up a plant in, I don't know, someplace in Kansas or Arizona, then you have the domino effect. Then that means that local businesses are also going to see people spending more money and so forth. He's trying to save money through USAID. In other words, and he wants to extend the Trump tax cuts. So there's a lot of things that he's got in his cauldron of economic policy. How do you think this whole thing is going to end up?
I think very well, frankly. One of the things that Trump and a lot of his team members have been focusing on is that we can use the revenue from tariffs to essentially replace lost revenue in terms of the income tax. And you might say, well, why would we be losing revenue for the income tax? Because we want to keep pushing those rates lower and lower. Let's not forget that during America's golden age, which was our fastest period of sustained economic growth, during that time, the nation didn't even have an income tax. The Supreme Court had actually ruled it unconstitutional. We had to later change the Constitution, unfortunately, in order to even implement the income tax. And so how did the government fund itself? It was financed almost entirely by tariff revenue. And so this idea that somehow implementing tariffs is going to cause tax revenue to collapse and it's going to cause the economy to collapse, I'm sorry, but neither economic theory nor the record of history support that idea. Again, if you look at our fastest period of sustained economic growth, that was when we didn't even have an income tax. All we had was tariff revenue, essentially, to fund the government.
Well, and you mentioned earlier, and I'll go ahead and in that cauldron of economic policies, also there is the deregulation, which is something that he did very successfully in his first term. In our minute or so that's remaining, EJ, what is Donald Trump, or what, in your opinion, should Donald Trump focus on as he speaks to basically it is the State of the Union, if you will? And what's his message to the American people as far as the economy goes?
I think it would be very good if the president would simultaneously recognize just what terrible shape we are in today. That we have, for example, the most unaffordable housing we have ever had. That's not according to me. That's according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, their national home affordability index. It's at its lowest level ever today. So simultaneously recognize how bad things are today, but walk that tightrope where you can also say that, look, there is hope. We are going to move to a better place, and here's how I intend to get us there.
All right, EJ, always great to have you on. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of week.